Hello, everyone. This is Kristen Huber, and on behalf of Sumo Logic and 451 Research, I would like to welcome you and say thank you for attending today's webcast titled Analytics and Machine Learning Drives ITOA 2.0 for Better App Performance. Leading up the discussion today will be Nancy Goring, who is Senior Analyst of Application and Infrastructure Performance for our Development, DevOps, and IT Ops group at 451 Research. Following Nancy will be Kalyan Ramanathan, who is VP of Product Marketing at Sumo Logic. Just a couple of quick housekeeping items before we get started. Number one, after the presentation, we'll have a brief Q&A period. To ask a question, simply type it in the question box on your screen below, and we'll get to as many as we can. We'll respond to all unanswered questions via email after the webcast concludes. Second, this presentation and slides will be made available to all attendees once the webinar is complete. And finally, please provide feedback at the end of the webinar. And with that, I'll turn it over to Nancy.
Great, thank you so much, Kristen, and thanks everyone for joining. So a quick introduction to me, and then I'll dive right in. So I follow a sector we call Application and Infrastructure Performance here at 451, which means I follow vendors that do APM, infrastructure monitoring, log management, performance testing, and related vendors like event management folks. And I'm going to talk today about something that I've been thinking of as ITOA 2.0. So I'm going to start from a very high level and talk a little bit about the drivers that have led to this development of ITOA, and also discuss some of the impacts that this is having on operations environments. So from a very high level, we're seeing that IT organizations are feeling pressure from a number of fronts. So this was a survey question that we asked IT decision makers. We asked, what's the most important goal for your IT environment over the next 12 months? And you can see the top response was respond faster to business needs. So agility is really driving a lot of the change that's going on in IT organizations right now. Reducing costs is sort of, obviously going to be top, and then improve reliability and availability is the third sort of biggest goal that IT organizations have over the next 12 months. So let's talk briefly about how IT organizations are enabling this. So how are they moving faster these days? And a lot of what they're doing is adopting new types of technologies in their application and infrastructure environments. And I'm going to talk through some of those. The first one is containers. So this is a trend that all of you have probably heard about. That is really sort of taking the world by storm. So we're seeing containers being adopted very broadly and widely. And I'm going to circle back to that in just a minute with an additional data point. But another big technology trend that we're seeing is the adoption of microservices architectures. And this visualization is one that was put out by a company called MyTaxi, and it is meant to show the microservices that make up their service and the connection between them. And what you can see here is that obviously it's a pretty complex environment. It's very different than a traditional monolithic application stack. And often in microservices environments, we see a polyglot environment as well, and that's often because teams that are responsible for building microservices are often given the leeway to choose the language or the framework that they want. We're also seeing an increasing prevalence of multi-cloud environments. And this is another one that I'll dive into more in just a second, because I think that this is a particularly interesting trend. And once you get into cloud adoption, you get into growing complexity from a networking environment, because you're increasingly relying often on the public network to reach those cloud services. We're seeing applications that increasingly rely on, or not rely on, but interact with third-party services. Could be something like a credit card processor. And yet applications still often have some sort of interaction with legacy systems, possibly even running on a mainframe. And they also are sometimes relying on multiple kinds of databases, and not always within a single app, but within an organization, we're seeing sometimes multiple types of databases. So it used to be that a business would very often standardize on one type of database. Now we're seeing them employ different kinds of databases depending on the need. And my point here, the end result of all of this is that the modern app is increasingly complex. So where you used to have, a single monolithic code base running on, a couple of servers, now you have all of these components making up a modern app. And I'll get more into some of the challenges that result from this. But first, I just want to dive really quickly into cloud and container adoption, because I have a little more to say around here, which sort of underscores the issue of complexity. So increasingly, we're seeing that cloud adoption and sort of the definition of hybrid cloud is kind of shifting to really be multi-cloud. So, we asked about the organizations and how they will use on-prem and off-prem environments over the next couple of years. And you can see here a little more than a third expect to be in a single cloud environment, but the rest expect to be in some sort of multiple cloud environment, with the most advanced being that 13% orange segment, where people are expecting to have seamless delivery of a single function across different cloud environments. So we're increasingly seeing this as a trend that organizations are adopting multiple clouds. And again, this adds some complexity from a monitoring standpoint and a management standpoint. And then I wanted to just touch on container adoption again quickly. So, we see that there's an interesting adoption pattern that we see with containers. So traditionally, when a new technology emerges and it's being considered in a business environment, there's a sort of typical adoption pattern that we see. So it's a new technology comes out, the first types of organizations to adopt it are startups, right? They have sort of the most to gain by taking a risk on a new technology, or businesses that were sort of built online and built on the concept of adopting the latest and greatest. And it's usually enterprises, very large businesses and enterprises in specific sectors like maybe healthcare or finance are usually a little bit slower to adopt because they have more to lose, right? There's more risk for them. But that's not the typical pattern that we've seen with containers, which I think is really interesting. And I'm telling you that really more from an anecdotal perspective, in that I talk to organizations of all sizes, all maturity, all sectors that are adopting containers in some way. But, I know that some vendors, including Sumo, when they sort of take an internal pulse of their customers, that's what they're hearing as well. So this is definitely kind of an interesting trend that we see. So, my point here is that in these modern environments that are embracing modern tools and have increasingly complex architectures, what ends up happening in an operations environment is that organizations adopt more and more tools to try to monitor what's going on in this complex environment. And so that might include APM, server monitoring, network monitoring, log tools, SIM tools. There's also, at the same time, other tools that organizations are using to look at business data. This doesn't even mention things like ITSM, event management, alerting tools. And the problem is that all these tools are siloed. They're not able to easily share data and correlate data. And that creates a number of problems like alert fatigue, and a lot of finger pointing, right? So, people these days have been talking about mean time to innocence. And so there's this weird dynamic that emerges where people who use a particular tool end up essentially using it to prove that their area of expertise is not the cause of a problem. And obviously that's not really the way to solve issues faster. And so what we saw a few years back was the emergence of ITOA as a way to solve this problem. So, the initial promise of ITOA was to bring all of this data together and run analytics on it and quickly surface the root cause of problems. But it didn't really come to fruition, right? I mean, there was kind of a whole bunch of buzz around ITOA for a stretch, and then, we all sort of stopped hearing about it for a while. And it turned out that there were some real roadblocks that slowed down adoption. So one was they were often closed, these ITOA systems, so they could only collect and analyze data from one vendor, which wasn't very helpful in an environment that has a bunch of tools that might come from different vendors. They also often only displayed really basic analytics. Sometimes it was just meant to allow the user to visually correlate data from different sources. So not real sophisticated. They were often expensive and difficult to implement. And despite the fact that they were designed to bring together all of this operations data, they typically had problems with scale. And this is, some of these roadblocks are things that we've uncovered in some of our survey data. So this was a relatively small survey we did where we asked kind of vaguely what challenges have you faced with your use of log or machine data analytics technologies. And I always think it's interesting when I see kind of an even distribution of responses like this. Like, look at how many of these responses are in the 30% range. It kind of indicates that there's a lot of problems, that there's a lot of sort of broad unhappiness. And here, if you look at the responses, they're kind of grouped around challenges with managing and maintaining these systems. Difficult to scale is actually the second. It's listed as third, but there's a tie for the second and third most popular answers here. Not great analytics, expensive, complicated. So, pretty wide distribution of problems that people had with analytics. So this is, the question we asked here was not specifically around an ITOA system, but it was around analytics and machine data and log data. And I think from this, we can infer some of the problems that we saw around initial implementations of ITOA. So, we've seen the emergence of a bunch of new types of tools in the monitoring universe that I've been thinking of as ITOA 2.0. And so these are more modern tools that are built on newer technologies, and they aim to solve a number of problems that coincidentally are very similar to the problems that the first generation of ITOA emerged to solve. So, these systems are designed to help end users learn about problems faster, so reduce the time to discover the root cause of a problem. Also, repair problems faster, and even in sort of in an ideal world, predict and prevent problems. And there's a number of technology advances that are enabling these systems. So one is I'm increasingly seeing this interesting trend towards combining logs and metrics in an analytics system. And this definitely gets at the heart of reducing the time it takes to find the root cause of a problem and repair it, because typically metrics are used in sort of a monitoring use case to discover when a problem is happening, and then logs are used to troubleshoot the cause of the problem. When you combine them, it's just quicker, right? So it typically is able to surface the logs that indicate the problem that the metrics are pointing to. I'm also seeing an interesting trend toward organizations that are pulling business data into these systems that were initially designed for operations data. And what that allows is correlating business trends like revenue to operations data. And it's a good way to understand how performance problems impact revenue. I'm also increasingly seeing a security use case in these more modern log and machine data analytics systems. And many of these systems do a better job of combining new and old data in a way that can also deliver some really good intelligence to end users. And so I want to dive in really quickly to the topic of machine learning, because that is often helpful in enabling some of these new ITOA 2.0 systems. This slide I'm also a little torn about showing, because I think on one hand, maybe it makes it look like 451 is partly to blame for the hype around machine learning. All this does is plot out the mentions of the term machine learning in our research over time. You can see, obviously, a really big uptick over the past couple of years. But the reality is, we don't write about and talk about technologies like machine learning sort of in a vacuum, right? So there's a reason that we're writing about it and talking about it. I would argue that that's both because of developments at vendors that are interesting, that sort of fall into this machine learning category, and also because of the interest that we're hearing from actual end users. And I also just want to make the point that, despite all this hype around machine learning, there's actually real reasons for it. So there are real drivers for machine learning right now. And they should make a lot of sense to you. So, one of them is this increasing trend towards digital transformation. And when we survey IT decision makers, we find that more and more organizations are embarking on official digital transformation initiatives. So this drives the availability of data. It also drives data scale. And, I've already talked a little bit about how the complexity of the sort of new modern application and infrastructure technologies generate more and more data than traditional monolithic application stacks. So all of this data, you can't just, visualize it as a way of analyzing it. Humans literally just can't analyze it. So that's a driving sort of a demand for machine learning. And then there's two other sort of technology things that have really supported machine learning. And one is that the cost of compute power has really plummeted. And there's also a growing comfort with the cloud, because machine learning that runs in the cloud is more efficient. It's more timely. So, and that's also sort of based on compute power. So you could technically have run machine learning in the past, but it would take so long to get the results that the results weren't necessarily very useful to you. So, so there's all these things going on that's really driving the development of machine learning technologies and the adoption of it by vendors and by end users. And so sort of to wrap up, in terms of the future of ITOA 2.0, there's definitely some challenges that remain. So machine learning is still being developed. There's still a lot of work going on to figure out the best way to apply it in the most useful way for customers. Scale is relative, so there's a lot of work still going on amongst vendors on the back end to ensure that they can support the scale that their customers need and want in a cost-effective way and in a way that can enable speedy analytics. Integrations can be a hurdle, so there's all these tools that organizations are using. There's all these technologies that they're embracing. Everything needs to be integrated in order to get the most out of an ITOA 2.0 system. But I would argue that the pieces are in place that ITOA can be much more useful, more accessible, and potentially really, really useful to customers. So with that, I will wrap up and hand over to Kalyan.
Hi, thank you very much, Nancy. I appreciate very much your excellent setup and introduction to ITOA 2.0. My name is Kalyan Ramanathan. I'm the VP of Product Marketing here at Sumo Logic, and I wanted to give you guys a quick intro into how Sumo Logic supports some of these advanced analytics capabilities that we believe are very core and imperative to managing today's modern application. But before I do that, let me just give you guys a quick introduction into Sumo Logic. Who is Sumo Logic? We are a leading cloud-native machine data analytics platform. And what we do is to help our customers manage the operations and security of their mission-critical applications. Machine data in our world typically means logs, metrics, events. These are typically generated by your applications when they're running, when they're serving your end customers. And what Sumo Logic really excels at is to aggregate, collect all this machine data, bring it into our platform, provide a lot of analytics capabilities, machine learning-driven analytics capabilities, so that now you can analyze this data, You can identify anomalies in this data and then improve the operations and security of your applications. We have about 1,500 customers under management. Many of these customers are folks who are born in the cloud, use AWS, Azure, GCP extensively. We also have many customers who are using us in hybrid environments. As Nancy mentioned, one of the key needs for ITOA solutions and these next-gen management solutions is the approachability and the ease of use of these solutions. And since we provide a service, by definition, we make our product and our service very easy to adopt and use. Our service is instant on. It requires zero maintenance on our customer's part. And since we run on a cloud service ourselves, this is AWS in this case, we provide infinite scale and elasticity to our customers. You can see some of these big numbers in terms of petabytes of data that Sumo Logic ingests on a daily basis, the number of queries that we can run in our system, and that should give you a sense of the kind of big data service that we are running within Sumo Logic today. I want to briefly touch on the modern app notion that Nancy referred to in her section. What Sumo Logic essentially sees in our customer environments are modern applications. And what we see are that these modern applications are very fundamentally different from the traditional applications of the past. And if there are three dimensions that I can highlight here, they are the following. First and foremost, many of these modern applications are built on cloud infrastructure where the technologies are very different, where the stacks are very different, where we see a prevalence of systems like containers and serverless technologies that are used to building these modern applications. Two, we see DevOps and Agile to be almost a constant in most of our customer environments. So these applications are changing a lot, and that's just the nature of things. Lastly, we are also seeing huge adoption of microservices style architecture, where it's easy to compose applications, mega applications from these services itself. Just a quick note for the folks on the phone here. If you need concrete, definition of modern application and concrete data around, modern applications, what components are used in the modern applications, what's the adoption of Docker and Kubernetes and serverless technologies and SQL and NoSQL, especially in cloud-based modern application, head on over to sumologic.com. We have a free report there where we have where the report provides chock full of real data in terms of the adoption and usage of many of these technologies. Now, as I mentioned before, right? I mean, the map of your application indeed is changing dramatically. But at the end of the day, managing these applications, still is not a simple task. For many of you guys on the phone here, as IT managers, as DevOps managers, SREs, etc., your goals haven't changed. At the end of the day, you still need to develop and deliver these applications with exceptional performance. You need to make sure that your end customers have the least latency when they're accessing these applications, when they're interacting with these applications. You also need to ensure that your application is secure. And finally, that your application also meets the compliance requirements, may they be internal or, for that matter, external regulatory compliance requirements that may be placed on you and your applications. So how do you actually do this well? We at Sumo Logic believe that the right way to manage these applications is through what we call as a unified machine data analytics platform. Think of this as an implementation of ITOA 2.0, exactly the way Nancy described, in her section. There are three characteristics and three foundational elements to this machine data analytics platform. First and foremost, you need to collect all kinds of machine data from your application. You need to collect logs, you need to collect metrics, you need to collect events. You need to bring it all into one place at one time. But aggregating this information is just the first step in the process. The next step that you have to do is to start to correlate all of this information so that you can very quickly identify problems in your application, identify anomalies within your application, and then you can also start to now analyze all of this data to get to the root cause of the problem. And this is where machine learning starts to come in, right? The amount of data that comes from the applications of today is such that it's just humanly impossible for someone to sit through and go through reams and reams of this data to identify a problem and then to troubleshoot and fix that issue. That's where machine learning starts to really play a role. And using automation provided by machine learning can dramatically improve your MTTI and your MTTR. Finally, what you need is a very scalable and elastic system. It's good without saying that that logs, metrics, and events today are very voluminous. You also have lots of peaks and valleys, seasonal peaks and valleys. If you're a retailer, you may see a crazy amount of volume of this data come the month of November and December, and then you may see very ho-hum data points for the first 10 months of the year. What you need, therefore, is a very scalable system and a very elastic system that can handle any kind of load that you may want to throw at a system like this. So what are the use cases that a machine data analytics platform and an ITOA 2.0 platform can support? So first and foremost, a machine data analytics platform can provide you immense insights into your application and the customers who are using these applications. Who are the users who are using this application? Where are they using this application from? What geography are they coming from? What browsers or what mobile channels are they using? What components within the application are they touching and are they interacting with? This is something that you can get very easily with a next-gen ITOA 2.0 solution. You obviously can get a lot of information into the operations of your application itself. What's the SLA of my application? How is it, delivering to the SLAs that I have given to my line of business? How can I bring logs and metrics together and solve problems exactly the way Nancy had described before? If you can bring logs and metrics into a system, one, you can very quickly, with the metric system, understand what is happening to your application and the SLAs of the application. Now you're monitoring every detail of that application, and you know when there is something going wrong with the application. With the log data now correlated with the metrics data, you can now drill down into the logs, and you can also find out the why is this application not working well. So bringing together logs and metrics essentially helps you bring together the what is happening to my application and why is this happening to my application. And that's the unique value that a unified solution can provide a customer. Now, by bringing together logs and metrics, you can also get incredible visibility into the security and compliance posture of your application. You can now find out who is accessing your application. Where are they accessing this application from? Are they suspicious users or are they legit users? And having that level of visibility built into that same platform allows you to now extend your operations visibility also into the security domain, which is, again, something that is very easily doable from a unified machine data analytics platform. And then finally, it's not just about identifying problems. It's also about getting to the root cause of the problem. And this is where machine learning really starts to play a role. Machine learning helps you identify that needle in a haystack. It allows you to look through reams and reams of data, voluminous data, peaks and valleys of data to identify things that are aberrant or things that are not normal in your system, which will then very quickly guide you to identifying the root cause of your issues, which you can then use to fix the problems in your application itself. So I talked a lot of theory here, but how does this tangibly work in terms of ROI for customers? And here are some great examples of Sumo Logic customers and the value that they're getting from an ITOA 2.0, a unified machine data analytics platform like Sumo Logic. We see our customers find multiple values from Sumo Logic. It goes without saying that we help a lot in terms of application operations. We help them ensure the performance and availability and the SLAs of their application by bringing together logs, metrics, and events in one place at one time. The same platform also helps many of our customers improve the security and compliance posture of their application. Finally, what you'll see is that a system like Sumo Logic can also help you dramatically improve the DevOps pipeline within your organization by providing you complete visibility into your DevOps process, not just in the production world, but also in the pre-production world, and the combination of the data across the pre-production as well as the production line. Finally, I would be remiss to say that if I don't mention that many of Sumo Logic customers are also using Sumo Logic to help them and aid them in their cloud migration use cases today. Sumo Logic provides great visibility into a customer's application, in their current environment, may they be on-prem or a hybrid environment. And then as they're moving their application to the cloud, we provide you lots of visibility and baselining capabilities that allows you to compare and contrast your application across multiple environments, thus allowing you to very gracefully move from your on-prem environment to a cloud data center. I want to finish this session by highlighting, why a solution like Sumo Logic, makes sense if you are considering, managing modern applications. First and foremost, it goes without saying, that these modern applications are very complex. You got many components to these modern applications. So having a system that provides you that complete visibility is very important, and that's something that Sumo Logic does very well. As Nancy mentioned, it's very important to have a approachable, useful, scalable, and elastic system. But the very fact that we offer our services in the cloud, it's like Salesforce. I mean, it's instant on. It's very easy to sign up. It's very easy to deploy. You don't have to manage the system. We take care of all of that for you. So we have taken the basics of ITOA and built a very robust service around it, which takes you away from managing your management system and allows you to focus on building great applications. We have machine learning built into our system. We realized that from the get-go that this amount of data cannot be humanly inferred by any one IT manager or IT operations team. So we have built-in machine learning to help you not just identify problems, but also help troubleshoot and fix problems. And then lastly, we believe that all kinds of machine data ought to be absorbed and aggregated and analyzed at the same time. That's the only way you get 360-degree view into your application. So by bringing together logs, metrics, and events, we are one of the early vendors who has brought this promise of ITOA to life. Sumo Logic is exceptionally easy to try out. Does not require you guys to set up a server. Does not require you guys to pay for anything. Head on over to sumologic.com, sign up for our service, and get started right away. So with that said, let me turn it over back to Nancy, and then we can address certain questions that we may have from the audience.
Great, thank you so much. So yeah, if you all have any questions, please feel free to type them into your screen and submit them, and we'll get to what we can. We have one question that makes me feel really bad. I was totally remiss in not actually defining what ITOA stands for, and so someone asked about that. So my apologies that I didn't do that from the get-go, and hopefully that didn't make everything that you've just heard more confusing. But ITOA stands for IT Operations Analytics. Okay, from there, I have another question that I'm super interested to hear from Kalyan about, and that is, one of the things that I think about when I think about ITOA 2.0 is what kind of additional use cases might be enabled once you have these systems in place. So obviously, there's the IT operations use case. Security is kind of another obvious one that I hear a lot about, and I know Sumo has some sort of packaged security-focused offerings. And I'm curious if you're seeing any other use cases or applications amongst your customers that are, particularly interesting.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's a great question, Nancy. It's obviously, operations and security are the key bread and butter use cases for IT operations. But we're seeing a lot of our customers also extend the machine data analytics offering that we have in other directions. We see business analytics starting to gain traction more and more, especially as companies go through digital transformation and your app is your business. It goes without saying that the data that comes from your app is now a very strong determinant to how your business is performing. We have customers who are using our service to understand how much revenue is flowing through their app, what kind of services are being used by their customers, where are people, using their service today, what geographies, what devices, etc. So we're definitely starting to see customers use us for application analytics, which is fast becoming synonymous with application analytics. I'd like to highlight a couple of other use cases that I think are also going to be very useful for the audience today. Compliance, as many of you guys know, is becoming a very big use case. Whether it be internal, compliance, standards, or an external standard like PCI or HIPAA or GDPR for that matter, which is fast approaching, at least for the EMEA folks on this call today. Logs, metrics, and events are critical to ensuring ensuring compliance to all of these standards. So as you are thinking about compliance, just know that a machine data analytics platform, a IT operations analytics platform is a bedrock foundation that is going to help you get there. The one last use case that I do want to mention is IoT. It's interesting that Sumo Logic, while I would say we didn't target IoT as a vertical, we are getting interest up the wazoo from IoT customers. IoT happens to be a perfect mix of cloud, big data, and machine data. And a solution like Sumo Logic and an ITOA solution where you bring together logs, metrics, and events from an IoT system into a central platform, and that you can analyze to identify anomalies in IoT applications seems to be a perfect recipe to managing these IoT applications.
Cool. So I have a quick follow-up for you, specifically around the sort of business use case. So, line of business or executives using a system like this. I'm curious if you have any tips for or sort of insight into how a tool like Sumo at your customers jumps from an IT tool to becoming used by line of business or C-level executives. Because I think there's kind of this issue where something like Sumo comes into an enterprise as an IT tool, and it's kind of labeled as such, and people outside of the IT organization aren't going to sort of naturally think of it as a tool that might be helpful in informing their own decision making. So how does that introduction happen to sort of introduce line of business or other sort of business use cases for a tool like Sumo?
Yeah, I think it's a very good question, right? And I think the trend lines that we see very clearly happen in organizations where the application happens to be the business of the company. Without naming names, we have a mobile phone radio company. They offer streaming services over the mobile phone. And, this company primarily bought us for a very IT operational use case. They wanted to ensure that these streaming services are very performant to their end customers. But as they started to use Sumo Logic, what they found out was that they get a lot of other visibility from the logs and metrics that are ingested into Sumo Logic. They can identify who is using their application. They can identify what radio stations are these folks using. They can identify even geographies where certain radio stations seem to have, more of an interest. There is, as you can well imagine, there are some radio stations that play well in the West Coast, some in the East Coast, and some perhaps in the southern part of the United States. And this data is now so readily available from these applications. That happened to be one of the dashboards that I know our champion created at this company. And before you know it, that mushroomed within the organization into dozens of dashboards of similar types that became the mainstay dashboards that was used by not just the IT organization today, but also by the product team, by the line of business team, by the CFO, and then finally the CEO. So it was a gradual uptake. It goes without saying, but then in companies where your application indeed powers your business, the leap from collecting this data to support a very IT-centric use case to going to providing business insights, can very well happen.
It's interesting that you say, this is sort of happening naturally in businesses where the app is sort of the business. And I think that is likely to sort of grow, that kind of sensibility is likely to grow interest in using ITOA type of tools in a business context, because, and it's interesting, I have a little bit of evidence of this. We have this one survey question that I think is really interesting where we ask people, how important is cloud to your business? And I don't remember off the top of my head what the answer is, but very important is like a huge response that people gave. And what I think is particularly interesting about that is the wording of that question. It's how important is cloud to your business, not how important is cloud to, improving the availability of your app or something that is sort of more technical. It's really getting at how important technology is to your actual business. And I think as more and more types of businesses become software driven and reliant on technology, even if initially, the app wasn't their business, I think there's going to be more openness and interest in using IT operations types of tools for understanding the impact on business. So anyway, I just think that's really interesting. So another question I wanted to ask you about is about machine learning. So, as I kind of talked about, obviously there's a lot of hype around machine learning. And I'm wondering if you have any advice for end users about what to look for when vendors are talking about machine learning. I mean, maybe even from Sumo's perspective, is there a way that you guys talk about it to allow people to understand why machine learning is important to what Sumo does, what kind of capabilities it delivers? I guess I'm just looking for any kind of advice on how people can sort of cut through the hype around machine learning and understand whether or not there's real value there.
Absolutely. I think you're very right. Once upon a time, people used to look very skeptically at machine learning. It's some voodoo science that goes on, and I don't even understand it anymore. But I think we have come a long way since, right? And, the way Sumo Logic looks at machine learning, right? I mean, there are fundamentally two ways in which we think of integrating machine learning into our platform. First and foremost, we want machine learning to be approachable and understandable. We believe that our customers, when they can understand what is going on behind the scenes, are more apt to adopting those kinds of capabilities. So a lot of what you will see in terms of machine learning in Sumo Logic is very easy to understand. It's very practical. It's very pragmatic in the way we try to solve problems. So that's exceptionally important. The second thing that we have done in our solution is to ensure that what we do does not require, lots of, unique new skill sets. We don't expect our IT operations people to become, sophisticated data scientists. At the end of the day, that's not a realistic expectation. So what you will see in the Sumo Logic solution is, in very many forms, the ability to access this machine learning in a very simple way. We have a one-click pattern matching algorithm in our system. We call it log reduce. It's a simple one-click access, one-click button, which will allow you to do some interesting clustering and pattern matching across our, all the logs and metrics that you throw into our system. We have simple one-click compare. We have simple one-click outlier detection. And, all of these things actually makes machine learning, one, very approachable, and two, very easy to do within our system. And, we'll continue to build on this. By no means are we done in terms of integrating machine learning in our system. We have a huge roadmap of things that we're going to be building into Sumo Logic. But our goal will always be to make this simple enough for the average, mere mortal IT operations person, security person, or for that matter, any other Sumo user to consume and use.
Okay. Great. So I'm going to ask one more question here, and then we're about out of time. So I wanted to ask you about sort of I referenced this earlier that a lot of organizations are adding more and more monitoring tools sort of as a way to better handle the volume, of data that they're collecting. I hear some horror stories about big international enterprises that have 40 or 50 monitoring tools across the organization. And, I hear some discussion around folks that are promoting the idea of ITOA 2.0 as the potential to help whittle down the number of monitoring tools that an organization might be juggling. In my experience, I see that there is some opportunity maybe to whittle down some of those tools. I still think that there's going to be real specialized tools that are continue. It's not like folks are going to end up with just one central monitoring tool. I think in most cases, many organizations may have demand for, maybe a tool that's specifically designed around database monitoring or network performance monitoring. But then they'll use an ITOA system to kind of bring together all the data that they're collecting from these different tools. Again, I think ITOA 2.0 may offer an excuse to get rid of some of these tools. But I'm wondering what you're seeing amongst your customers. Are they adopting Sumo and then getting rid of a bunch of tools? Do you see this as an opportunity to reduce the number of monitoring tools that people are juggling?
Yeah, I think that, there's I'd say the results are a little mixed in that, and let me sort of explain what I mean by that. So Sumo, as I mentioned before, brings together logs, metrics, and events in one place at one time. And we have customers who used to use a log analytics tool, a metrics monitoring tool, and some other event management tool, and they have now consolidated and standardized on Sumo Logic. Now, I see unification and I see tool whittling happening along a slightly different dimension too, especially as you move to the cloud. If you're on AWS or Azure or even GCP for that matter, the need to monitor infrastructure in the way we were monitoring infrastructure in the past. I need a storage tool, I need a network tool, I need a server tool, I need perhaps a container-specific tool. That is indeed going away now. What we are starting to see is that, thanks to some of the native capabilities provided by these sophisticated cloud vendors, and because of tools like Sumo Logic that can integrate very easily to these cloud vendors, you do see a whittling of and I'd say unification of some of these capabilities into a few number of vendors. That being said, there are always going to be some specialized tools. There's going to be an APM tool, like say New Relic or AppDynamics, in many customer environments where Sumo Logic plays, and we are extremely complementary to these vendors. They manage end user application experience. We provide visibility into the application and the infrastructure and the logs and metrics that come from these systems. So I do think that you will see some reduction in tools, especially as people move to the cloud. But at the same time, there will always be a need for highly specialized tools that do, specific things and do it very well.
Mm-hmm. Interesting. Yeah. Great. So I think that we're about out of time. So I want to thank everybody, and I'm just going to hand it over to Kristen quickly for some closing remarks.
Great. Thanks so much, Nancy. That does conclude our webinar for today. As a quick reminder, the on-demand version will be available on BrightTalk shortly. On behalf of Sumo Logic and 451 Research, thank you so much for attending and have a great day.